I want to say is that it would have been worth seeking the nomination stand for the presidency to have heard these speeches that you have heard this evening. I really mean that. It was, in a sense, one of my aims, not just on this occasion, but on a previous occasion, that this was a discourse that needed to be brought in from the Code. It's very important that we hear what you have just heard from Tatham to Niall, and Memba to Susie, and Alice, and Rob. And I am grateful to them for the references they have made to my own work over the years. But all I would say to you as we go home this evening, and it is important, let us make it all happen. Let's make sure that this discourse is one we will do regularly as the next president goes around the country, meeting all of the people. So long ago, I remember when I was on the MacBride Commission on the Rights of Prisoners, we were visiting prisoners and their families. And suddenly I saw in this country that it became unfashionable. Suddenly people didn't want to talk about prisoners' rights anymore. They wanted to send more people to prisons. And we moved from the rights of prisoners to, in fact, really talking about building more and more expensive ways of containing people. And I go back to that, and I also think of those migrants I visited in 1969, when I was 28 years old, in a Telford in Shropshire, young man from Carrow, with an elderly man, his father, working for British Sugar. Recently I visited migrants in London and Camden and so forth, all Irish. And I had these in mind, these people in mind, these forgotten Irish as they're sometimes now called. And I also met others in London. I met members, for example, who had fled Ireland because of their sexual orientation and who weren't allowed the freedom of being and belonging in their own country. I also met some of the people who are in prison in Britain, for example. And again, they are all Irish. They are all our Irish. And I felt I had these in mind when I was preparing for a major speech on the 1st of May. It was on the 1st of May I produced these major concepts of the kind of Ireland we should want to have. An Ireland that would be so completely different from the last 10 and 15 years. Whereas I see it, we were strutting and we were representing a version of Ireland that was neither very authentic nor ennobling, nor in the end of the day enormously moral. We took it upon ourselves to say, for example, did you know that we're the second richest people in the world? We gave lectures to social democrats in Sweden. Charlie McCreevy lived in a campaign across all of Scandinavia to tell them how backward they were because of the Parliament plan. And all of this, whether you are, I'm put into the field by the Labour Party, but I require the support and need support of all people of progressive mind, those who want to see things done differently. But look, you will have to ask people who do stand now in the next 6 weeks, where are they on this issue? Are they talking of repairing that version of Ireland? Or are they talking of inviting people to go to a new place? I am doing the second, quite openly. And that was why, in the May Day message, I said we are talking radical individualism has brought us, not just us, but many people around the world, to a place where it is that, in our case, we've lost our economic sovereignty. But in other places, people have been reduced to misery. And it's important that we look at that radical individualism, remember, delivered politically, but also supported and developed by intellectuals. There are people who took it upon themselves to say, this is the only version of the world. Going back to that classical period in philosophy, we are challenged to say is, what might we know? What should we know? What should we do? These are fundamentally important questions in a democracy. So it is important to say What has failed must not be revived. We need to get to our new place. So I put opposite that as the very opposite of that radical, corrosive individualism, which expressed itself not only in economic matters, but even in the way people spoke, the way people dealt with each other, the way people looked and cared or didn't care for each other. And I said we must have a radical, inclusive citizenship. Now, whether or not you say you can afford it this year or in the next 5 years, let us, in the presidency debate, have it accepted as a principle. That is terribly important. That means you will not be trying to tame the equality authority. You won't be trying to bring combat poverty back into the department. You won't be trying to take heritage back into another government department. You're protecting the integrity of the discourse by having the principle accepted. Then the second issue was in a creative society. I had known myself the sheer fantastic liberation it was to see children playing. Indeed, you know, when they've all stopped reading Marx, they forget that maybe the two most important words he had were homo ludens, the instinct to play. And then you see the change in children's lives, the change it would have made in this country if every child was numerate and every child was able to read. And I've often said it again and again, if every child had access to a musical instrument, was able to swim. These capacities for being in the public space. Amartya Sen said, you know, and it was fairly moderate, as one would expect from Amartya Sen, about asking to define the purpose of politics. He said, to be able to participate in the public space without shame, but to be able to be part of your society with the joy, knowing, as you know yourself, that you couldn't do it on your own, but that when you went out with others and shared your vulnerability with them, and also their possibilities with you, that then together you could get to a point of celebration of what was truly human. And that's what inclusion is. There are such good people. Robin was describing the people, the different campaigns that I fought with so many others and others. But there were great academics too. People like Kieran Benson, who wrote that report on access and opportunity, on the importance of inclusion. You know, it was one of the great debates I had at one stage where I said that creativity is social. Creativity is something that is built from our interaction with others. And some people said he's going to depress the whole thing by really its genius. Where before that you would have somebody rather say about a child, the piano will stand to her. Well, the fact of the matter was, suddenly you had Sandy Fitzgerald and myself and others going around the country with a movement called Creative Activity for Everyone, CAFE. And we went all around the country. And you had people who were community groups, developing community arts and so forth. And that is so important. Much later, when I was Minister and President of the Council of Culture Ministers in Europe, I kept saying to them, if you're serious about democracy and citizenship, you will recognize that the cultural space is wider than the economic space. That it is when you have high unemployment and exclusion and poverty and deprivation, that you need the libraries, the parks, all of the public plazas, everything like that. And that was the vision that was there for the brief post-dictatorship moment in Nicaragua, when they were writing about children. That lovely chapter, Para los Niños, for the children. But this notion of a cultural space is very important, was what in the back of my mind when I put in that third leg, the creative society. And the creative society is not about aesthetic things only. It's about being creative in administration, creative in trade, creative in diplomacy, creative in making suggestions for the reconstruction and post-conflict societies. Creativity in everything, expressing our shared humanness. And you know, in relation to this, because so many people here that I so applaud who have been in the NGO sector, and some particularly the smaller groups. I remember well, for example, in the people working in the gay and lesbian area, I've seen them in their pale faces as they were rejected again and again. And I remember one of the things I'm most proud of, and that the Labour Party should be proud of, it was that the first conference at which Kieran Rose and others were invited to speak was a Labour Party conference in Cork when I was Vice Chairman of the Labour Party. And really, you in the Labour Party who are already there, whether it was Mervyn Taylor in the equality legislation, or whether it was Frank Lusky setting up combat poverty, whatever our faults may have been or whatever we didn't do, we did all that, and we did it together. And together, if we are restoring, as I call them, anchor principles in relation to the kind of Ireland we want, I made it deliberately programmed it in terms of a radically inclusive citizenship in a creative society. And creativity is important even in advocacy, because I have seen, not only here but in other countries, people agitate, for example, to the point of having the law changed, only to have the gains robbed from them by the administrative negation of what was achieved in law. Advocacy has to drive past the point of legislation, of legislative admission, to the administration itself. We have so many examples, combat poverty, equality, human rights, and so forth. But also, if you are to do that, what will enable you to do that? You will not be enabled to do that by handing the state over to somebody else with a different ideology. If you were to say, we can start all over again, or as Zizek would say, you need a new terrorism to sweep everything away, you are in fact offering up a terrible sacrifice. The fact is, we can do it all if we change consciousness. The role of the President, as you have heard, is constitutional. It's ceremonial. And I will fulfill that with dignity, remembering that one speaks for Ireland, not oneself. But it is the discretion you exercise, indeed, as you have heard, in the topics that you take up, to whom you speak, and how you do it. You're at that stage, doing something that is beyond the 3 or 4 years administration of government. And I was a cabinet minister, and I know the pressures that are on cabinets. You are talking about the themes that we should be talking about, but are not talking about. The instincts of the heart as well as the instincts of the head. The strengths that are all around us in different areas as people are changing their lives and doing it in different ways, unemployed groups going into the area of producing organic gardens, other people making new products and so forth. And also being creative in relation to science and looking at the possibilities of science and its application technology, and insisting on it being applied in a way that will be emancipatory. For example, the finest intelligence working on new equipment for people who are disabled. Well, all of this is in fact a kind of discourse. And really, isn't it wonderful that in this room, this evening, some of the lead people who have been there at the front, who are, as it were, also reminding me, as I hope I will be President, that you are a President of Ireland of all the vulnerabilities, as much as anything else. To be vulnerable, to be able to have, in fact, to despair, to look at your children with particular needs, or to all of these kinds of... Why should they be in as an indicator of some kind of exclusion? That's why we must, as I said, have the radically inclusive citizenship in a society we're making more creative every day. And then we'll be on our way to being a real republic. Finally, you know, I was asked about this word that I use, republic. Well, how and why am I using it? It was used by the Greeks, it was used by the Romans, it has been used by the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran, it has been used by different people. Well, whatever you're talking about raised publicly, it is the celebration that is involved in doing everything in the public gaze, of we looking and caring for each other. If the right want to win an election, let us call them right. If you are of some favour of a social democracy or a socialism that is inclusive, let us be able to say that too. But one thing we do know, Ireland in 2011 is a country of many broken dreams. It is a country of trust that has been betrayed in many institutional senses. There is a great transformation needed, a transformation of the quality of the times that was there between the two great wars
or maybe at the end of the 19th century. We are in a time of change, a change that is going to be global, as paradigms of trade and economics, indeed as you have heard, will be changed. It will be a time when I hope internationally that respect for indigenous wisdom and the right to choose your path to security and away from fear will be respected. There will be transformations in politics, in institutions, but the principal change that is needed here is a change in consciousness. We were near our emancipation at different times. During the time our state was established, we left administrations in place that contradicted the aspirations of some of the people who made the greatest sacrifice. Very shortly, we will be celebrating a number of centenaries. But you know, I thought about it as Robin and others were talking here. Well, how was it that we weren't able to do all this that we've all been talking about this evening? I remember it so well. I was a co-signatory of the bill to abolish the status of illegitimacy with Senator John Horgan and then Senator Mary Robinson. And I remember well, there wasn't a legal really argument against us at all. It was an argument that someone would appear out of the shadows and claim an enormous farm and mead. It was about property. And once again, when I went on to the issue in relation to the matters about family planning, it was the property. The first divorce referendum, for example, in Selwyn, do you think it was about people's relationship? It was about the property rights, once again. So we have allowed often the property instinct, the notion of people being free to own their own property, free from imperialism or some art, was a sufficient liberation. It was not. And the great thing about it is that out of the ashes of all those broken expectations and dreams, it is possible now to make sure that this discourse, maybe if it's not in the newspapers, but if it is here in this room, that you will hear it regularly for 7 full years. So my message is,